Welcome to the Hart Foundation panel. Everybody knows our current royalty, Bret Hart, I hope. So I just have a few rules, okay? No flash photography, because they're like a strobe effect, and that can cause seizures. Also, there's going to be somebody, mic runners. So if you have a question, just put up your hand, and the mic runner will come to you with the microphone. Please restrict yourself to one question, okay? Thank you, and I'm gonna hand it over to our moderator.
Hey guys, how's it going? Woo! I'm Mike from Mike's Bloggity Blog. I write about Canadian entertainment, and I think the first form of entertainment for me was watching these next guests when I grew up. It's unbelievable. Has anyone ever seen Anvil or Bret wrestle before, live? Nice. Was anyone at the Canada Stampede? Nice, a couple of you. All right, excellent. Well, you guys don't want to hear from me. Let's bring out Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent. And there's a phone up here, so we can just... Excellent. All right, so here they are, guys. Do you guys want to ask questions, or I can get started? If anyone has a question, raise your hand. All right, wait, right up front. While you're getting up there, I have to ask, where did you guys come up with the pink and black for your costumes, uniforms?
You know, the truth is, we had a lady back then that used to make our wrestling gear, and I remember we used to call her, we'd say, we need a new color, because if you remember back then, we used to have the blue tights with a black stripe, and we had, I think we had maroon with a silver stripe. We had a few different colors, but we kept asking her for a new, like, got a new color, and she kept saying, I don't really have anything. Yes, all I got is a hot pink. And I kept going back to Jim. I said, all she's got is a hot pink. And I remember the first time he goes, nah, we'll never wear hot pink. And then I came back and said, nah, hot pink's not going to work. And then we didn't get any gear. We just kept waiting. And I called her again about a month later, and she said, there's nothing for new colors. I said, she kept talking about this hot pink. And I went back to Jim, I guess, and she got this hot pink. And Jim had a change of heart. I remember he was pulling on his beard, and he goes, I like it. And it was like, at the time, Adrian Adonis was he had the pink tights with Jimmy Hart. And we just showed up, and it's kind of a funny story, because I remember we were at catering for a Saturday Night Main Event, and Vince McMahon was there with Dick Ebersol from NBC, you know, bigwig and all that, and he was in the line at the buffet table at the catering, and me and Jim kind of strolled in, and we had the hot pink tights on. And I remember Vince, he did like a double take, and he just about fell over. And I remember he stopped. He said, "Stop everything!" And I remember like I was getting a bun or something. It was like, and he made us stop. He goes, "Don't move." And he walked around me and Jim about 3 times. And I remember me and Jim were almost like, this kind of stuff, maybe we're gonna get fired. I don't know. And it was like, he circled around. He goes, "Whatever you do, don't change that color." He goes, the Hart Foundation's been missing one thing since they got here. It's color. And he goes, that's your color. And that's how it came about.
Nice, very good. Up front.
What is your most embarrassing moment?
It's kind of a delicate question, right, Bret? There's been a bunch of them.
Yeah, it's hard to think of the best one. The one that's for family viewing, anyway. Most embarrassing. You got one?
Well, there was that time in upstate New York with Vince McMahon. He had a party with some of his older girlfriends in a private room.
If you remember the old TNT, they used to have a TNT show. It was like Vince doing like a Johnny Carson type show. And he used to have the Rosattis. That's like what Jim's referring to, these kind of big gals that are about 400 pounds each. And they were Vince's favorite fans, though. He let them come to all like his private parties, and I remember Jim and I, we were at a ground round restaurant in upstate New York, just like Jim said, and we had wrestled about 5 times that night for a TV taping, we were just like completely wiped, sort of running on fumes. We hadn't eaten or anything, and we end up having a few beers in the ground round, and they kept asking us if we wanted to be part of the party in the back, and we kept saying, no, we don't want to be part of the party, wrestling for our party with a bunch of wrestling fans kind of thing. We were kind of tired and didn't want to go to the party. Because it was right after WrestleMania 1, I think, and so wrestling was kind of really a big time for wrestling, and as we socialized and had a few more beers, by the end of the night, I remember it was like, let's go check that party out. And I remember it was in the back of the ground round restaurant, and they had this partition with the wall sort of slid together, and we came up, and Jim just started pushing on the wall. And I remember the whole wall swinging like the back and forth. We thought it was so cool that the wall moved, you know, but actually Vince and all his sort of office guys were on the other side of the wall, and everything's getting knocked. We're knocking people over and stuff. And we'd had a few beers, and I remember Jim found the seam in the wall, and he pulled the wall apart, and the Hart Foundation stumbled into this room, kind of inebriated, and there was Vince, Hulk Hogan, Brian Blair, and the Rosati's, and Vince. It was like a little brown noser party of all the. And I remember we were kind of a little bit worried that when
we were new.
Yeah, it's the kind of stuff we tried to stay out of Vince's path back in those days. But as far as embarrassing stories, I remember one time being at a tanning place, and my brother Owen took all my pants, and he took everything I had and put it downstairs, so that the only way I could go downstairs and get it, like the only way I could actually get anywhere was to go down naked and get somebody's attention that my pants were missing. That would probably be the most embarrassing thing I think I can think of top of my head.
Nice, excellent. Anyone else back there? Looks like in the tie. No.
I have a question for Jim, actually. I was just wondering, who was it easiest to team with out of Bret and Owen?
Oh, that's an easy one. Owen was the easiest and best wrestler of the whole lot, including the British guys and everybody. Owen was as smooth and easy as you can get. You know, when Bret starts a match off, he's real hard and aggressive, and he's getting his heat up real violently. And when Owen does the same thing, starts a match off and getting his heat up real aggressively, Owen gets his fingernails in the guy's back, goes, Owen, what are you doing? You know, Owen was definitely a real smooth operator out there and fun to be with.
Excellent. Looks like there's right up here.
Yeah, just going back to the pink. When I was in junior high is when you guys made the conversion to pink. And I just got to say, it did not go over well at my junior high school. And I was just wondering, for you guys, what sort of, the politics involved, what sort of negative feedback you guys got over that?
Well, you know what, at the time, we were, like, it was kind of true, we didn't have a lot of color. We were kind of always under the radar. Like, people talked about us, but we weren't really the main teams that they were talking about back then. And I think when we changed it to the pink tights, as difficult as that might have been, which, it got a good reaction from people. At the time, we were bad guys, so it made perfect sense. And
remember, Bret, the pink wasn't fashionable then.
Not long after that, it became fashionable.
Yeah.
Everybody had pink on. It was. I always tell people it wasn't my favorite color, but it was my lucky color. We did well by the color pink, and I think I've learned one thing in life: it's not to judge anything by color. That's for sure.
Great. Right back, halfway back. There we go.
This is a question for Bret. In your book and various interviews, you were very against the path the WWE took during the Attitude Era, very sexy, very crude. You've been fairly involved kind of recently, so do you think they've gone back to being more family entertainment?
Yeah, for sure they have. I mean, it's wrestling today is you're pretty safe letting your kids watch wrestling for the most part today. And I think I had a lot to do with maybe changing it back. I think I was fairly outspoken. I always thought, for me, pro wrestling is something that if your grandpa and your grandson can't go to watch the wrestling, it's not worth going to watch. So I think wrestling should always be family entertainment.
Go ahead.
Hi, I just want to thank you guys for your years of service, and I'm sure everyone here appreciates it. My question relates to the late 80s, and you guys were one of the technical teams, and so were the Rockers. Did you guys have any backstage politics with some of the power teams at all?
No, you know what? We always got along pretty much with everybody. I remember when me and Jim first tagged up, when we first started in the beginning, we'd be in the dressing room and it'd be like some big, huge guy like Earthquake, and it's like, I can remember coming up to Jim and say, "You got the big guy if he starts." And I said, I got the little guy if he starts. And it worked, because Jim, Jim could hold his own against any of those big guys like Earthquake and Tugboat and all those guys. There was a lot of big guys back in those days, and Barbarian and Haku with the Island. There were some big, tough guys that, I was quite happy to step back and let Jim start the match, And Jim was good at that. He could start the match with those big guys, whereas they wear me down, and I couldn't be the technical wrestler that I was, getting mashed by these big guys. But Jim would go in and sort of take that load off my back, and then I would go in and do the excellence of execution stuff after Jim softened him up for me.
Up front, do we have one? No. Oh, over here.
I'd like to go back to some old school wrestling, since I grew up here in Calgary watching you. Brett, I'd like to ask you about fighting Bad News Allen, because I can remember you guys going through the aisles and chairs flying everywhere. And Jim Neidhart, about Duke Myers.
Well, let me get Duke Myers out of the way so Brett can go with Bad News, because that's pretty good. You see that thing on my tooth right here? That's Duke Myers' head. We locked up in the turnbuckle. That had to be God knows how long ago, 83 or 84. And Duke Myers' tooth hit the top of that right there. And that just fell off a couple of days with some plastic dental work. But that's the old Duke Myers. He was a real good hand that Stu Hart insisted having guys, big guys like that there, that could really knowledgeable, seasonable vets. He was a good dude.
Bad News was he was no fun to wrestle. I can tell you that much about him. He was they used to call him a meat chopper. That was kind of what his wrestling description was in the dressing room. It's like when you walked in and looked at the lineup and it's like, oh, I got bad news. It was like, it was always going to be a long night, of a hard match. He was always a tough guy to work with. But, I think wrestling Bad News back in the old Stampede days, it was, he was hard to say he was in his prime, but I'd say he was in his prime then as far as toughness and speed and stuff. And when he came to WWE a few years later, he was a little older now and a little, I think his injuries caught up with him a little more, and it was a little easier for me to work with him. But those old Stampede days were tough. He was really hard to work with. I don't miss those matches.
Over here.
I have a question about the Coliseum home video you guys did.
Years ago?
With the office and the tag belts in the back,
and stoles on
and answering the phones and stuff. What was the concept with that, or is there anything that happened that day that's?
You know what? It was kind of sad because we went to New York and it could have been so much better. Like I remember saying to him, I said, "Why don't we could film this thing up in Calgary at the Hart House, and it could be like the real Hart Foundation kind of video or call." But they were like, no, we got it all figured. They did it kind of their way, and it was kind of thrown together, and it was kind of cheaply done, and it is what it is today. When you watch it, it's like, it could have been way better if they we didn't have enough clout in those days. Like we suggest stuff, and you know, it just they knew better than we did. Like it's funny how the industry works sometimes. Like I remember me and Jim, we were really popular and really over, I think, for at the time, but we couldn't get him to market us or merchandise us with T-shirts or anything yet. And we kept saying, we know we can sell something, you know, like merchandise, and because a lot of guys were making a lot of money on merchandise and the T-shirts and the posters and the things that whatever they marketed it for you. And they finally came to me and Jim with this idea that we're going to do see no evil, hear no evil. And you probably remember that poster where Jim was plugging his ears, and I think I was covering my face, and Jimmy Hart was covering his mouth. And I can remember when they were doing it, I said, this poster it sucks. It's a lousy poster, and it's not going to sell. I can tell you right now that my fans are not going to buy this poster, because I'm standing there, I got my face completely covered up with my hands. It's not going to sell. And they did it their way, and it didn't sell. And it's like 6 months later, me and Jim are doing jobs for the Rougeau brothers, and they're going, well, you guys couldn't get over. And it's like, because you couldn't sell. And it's like, it's not us, it's you guys. And we finally I got them to do a little blank tank top hoodie, or not hoodie, like a black tank top that had me on the front of it. And it sold like crazy because it was a good looking tank top. And it was the only WWE tank top, and it sold like crazy. And suddenly they started marketing us, but it was always like, you know, it's those little things. They blame it sometimes on the wrestler when it's not necessarily the wrestler's fault. You know, it's just a bad idea. You know.
And who had the glasses? I still have the glasses. Those are awesome.
Well, they weren't. Those glasses weren't easy. Bret had to really fight to keep those sunglasses on.
Yeah.
There was one time they came in. Me and Jim were doing promos, and they came in. This is like 1 week before they came out with the sunglasses, and they came in and they said, no sunglasses. Take them, you gotta have them off. Vince wants everybody doing the interviews with no sunglasses. And I remember I said, we didn't have music in those days, or we didn't even have ring jackets. Me and Jim just walked out all the time. And I remember I said, I don't have much of a gimmick. You know, like all I got is Bret Hitman Hart, and I have these sunglasses and some wet hair. You know, and guys, I remember I stood my ground. I said, I got to wear the sunglasses. And we had the guy that was in charge of doing the interviews insisted that I had to take them off. So I had to do an interview. I still see it once in a while when I watch old stuff back, where I keep taking them off and putting them back on. And I remember I kept trying to tell them that it was the only gimmick I had. And then a week later, they came up with the sunglasses. And I remember I said, see, this is what I was talking about. And they gave them to me, and they, probably from a marketing standpoint or merchandise, I think it's the biggest selling thing that WWE still to this day ever had was those sunglasses. I think it cost them, I don't know what it cost to make them, a few pennies or something to make those sunglasses, but they made a fortune selling those sunglasses everywhere. And you know, it was just a good idea.
Yeah. Excellent. There's a slew of questions over here. We'll try to get to them all.
Okay, this is still on the topic of the marketing and everything. One of my fondest childhood memories was the action figures, the Bret Hitman Hart action figures. It was really cool because he was tall, had all the pink and stuff on it. What did you think of some of the action figures and stuff that came out of it?
I think for me, like, that was the coolest thing that ever happened in wrestling for me. I mean, if someone could have told me when I was about grade 3 that someday I'd be immortalized in an action figure, I would have thought that was the coolest thing imaginable ever. Like that would, and it still is. It's up there with the biggest things that I mean, it was a real thrill seeing yourself in a rubber doll. I mean, it really, even if it looked more like Jim Powers, it still was pretty cool. Same with the baseball card or the wrestling cards. I remember when I first saw them, I thought, that's so cool to be on a card. I want to keep this card forever kind of thing. I don't know if I've even got one left today, but.
I was going to ask you guys still have memorabilia in your house?
Some of it,
yeah.
It's hard to find a lot of good Hart Foundation stuff, I'll be honest. It's most of the stuff I had, like, you know, the Hart Foundation, the box set of the dolls of me and Jim, I think is worth about $1,000 if it's unopened today.
So Bret, how many different dolls did you have made of you since the very first one? They're real big and hard.
Probably about 10, 15, somewhere in there. 10
or 15 different ones, different outfits, different.
Yeah, some pretty cool ones. I think anyway. I've always been really happy with how they give me the abs and all that, make me look pretty good on them. I got some huge guns for some of them. I got bigger guns than Hogan in some of those dolls.
I want a doll like that. Oh, sorry, up front.
Hi, other than the obvious choice of Canada's greatest athlete, Iron Mike Sharp, who would you say are some of the best Canadian wrestlers, past and present?
Well, I think for sure Owen was, one of the greatest Canadian wrestlers. I think there's a lot of people that worked with Owen that pay tribute to him today, but there's a lot of people that didn't get a chance to work with him that don't know how good he was. He was really, really good to work with, just like Jim said a few minutes ago. Lance Storm was a really good wrestler. Despite the very dark black ending that Chris Benoit had, but prior to that, he was a great wrestler and a great guy, prior to that horrible tragedy at Edmonton. But there was always a lot of, even the Rougeau brothers were good wrestlers. And even Rick Martel was a really good wrestler. A lot of the French-Canadian wrestlers were really good. They were really skilled. They were different than out west here, like Calgary, but they were really good in their own right. And there was a lot of good ones, French-Canadian wrestlers. I personally rate Edward Carpentier as one of the greats of all time.
Okay, we'll go here and then we'll go to the back.
This is a question for both of you. How did you guys become the Hart Foundation?
Well, I think it was my idea. As I remember it, they had passed down the good news to me that they were going to call me Cowboy Bret Hart. And they'd give me the big news that I was going to have a horse and I was going to sell my wrestling figure with the horse. And I didn't even have a wrestling figure yet. So it was like, okay. I remember I got pretty excited about it. And I rode with Jim from Toronto up to Brantford, where I just found out the good news that I'm going to be Cowboy Bret Hart. And Jim couldn't stop laughing all the way up to Edmonton. Or all the way to Brantford, which is where they did the TV taping. But I remember Jim kept turning around and looking at me, and he just started laughing. And it made me feel a little self-conscious. I kept thinking about it like, shit, maybe I shouldn't be a cowboy. And I remember thinking about it until I finally thought, by the time I got to the town, I remember I said, I don't want to be a cowboy. I do not want to be a cowboy. And that night when the show was over, I went and I knocked on the guy that was in charge of all that then, kind of the boss, Vince's right-hand guy. And I remember knocking on his door about 1 a.m. He was all cranky and he just went to bed and all that. And he was like squinting through the door. And he goes, what is it? And I said, I just want to tell you I don't want to be a cowboy. And he couldn't believe it. He was like, you're kidding me. This is going to be really big. You're going to have a horse in the box and all this. You're going to ride out to the ring and a horse and a different horse in every town. And I told him the truth. I said, where I come from, you better be a real cowboy if you want to pretend to be a cowboy. And I'm not a real cowboy. And I don't want to pretend to be one. And I remember he kind of felt bad for me. It was almost like watching somebody make this big mistake with his career and his life. And it's like, I remember he said, put his hand on my shoulder. He goes, well, don't worry. He says, we'll come up with something for you. And I said to him, how about Jimmy Hart's managing Anvil, Jim Neidhart. And I said, we all got the last name Hart, our names. Why don't you call us the Hart Foundation? And he said to me, he goes, you could never be a bad guy, ever. And so, but don't worry. He said, well, something will come up for you. And so I remember the next day, I think I pulled Jim aside and I said, because Jim was actually doing really well for himself back then. He didn't need me to be sort of shackled with at the time. And I remember thinking it's not really fair for me to present this idea like me and Jim when I hadn't even talked to Jim about it. And so I pulled Jim aside. I said, I don't know I hope it's okay that I mentioned that, maybe they should throw me and him together. And I remember Jim was like, that's great. Love it. It'd be great to tag up with you and all that. And he was all positive about it. And a few weeks later, they signed the Bulldogs, and as soon as they signed the Bulldogs, actually, it was a few days before that, but I remember, I showed up at the Poughkeepsie TV tapings in New York, and I drove through a snowstorm to get to the show, for the TV show, and when I got there, I wasn't on the card. Like, they took me off all the TV shows, like, for the next 3 weeks, because they'd shoot 3 weeks of wrestling all in 3 weeks period, like, in one night. And I remember I got real mad, and I told that same guy that was my boss, I said, I'm gonna call you tomorrow. And he knew I was pretty mad about driving all the way there and being off. And I remember I thought about it, I dialed the numbers, and I was gonna quit in the morning. I called him up to quit. And I said, first thing I asked him, I said, what are you gonna do with us? Or with me? Tell me what you're gonna do with me. And I think he knew I was gonna quit, and it was like this sort of make or break moment that my whole life could have changed in a second, and I could have been back here in Calgary working at Turbo pumping gas or something. And I just remember he said, we're gonna do exactly what you wanted us to do. We're tagging you with Neidhart, and we're calling you the Hart Foundation. And I was like, really? I couldn't believe it. And it was like, I remember thinking about it for a second, and it was like, okay, I'll take it. I'll take it. And I remember thinking, I said, now I can show everybody how I can wrestle. Because as a good guy, I had all these guys that didn't want to work with me or didn't want to do much with me. And they set the pace in wrestling. If you don't have a good bad guy, like if your bad guy is slow and lazy and doesn't want to do much and just wants to lie on the mat most of the way through the match, I mean, you're not going to have a very good match. But now that I was a bad guy, I could control the pace of the match. And me and Jim, if you look back in those old Hart Foundation days, we could really set a pace, and we started to have some really good matches, especially with the Bulldogs. And that was what happened. The Bulldogs got signed, and they needed someone to work with the Bulldogs, because the Bulldogs were a very different style than a lot of the American guys were used to. And me and Jim stepped up to the plate and wrestled the Bulldogs, who were like their big stars then. And we got the Bulldogs over, but in the meantime, we got ourselves over. And that's the story of the Hart Foundation.
Nice, excellent. Okay, all the way to the back.
I'm sure a lot of us will agree that you guys are one of the greatest tag teams in the history of wrestling, and great individual workers in your own right. But of the current crop of wrestlers out there today, wrestlers you haven't faced, who would you guys have liked to have faced both individually and as a tag team?
Well, I don't know of any tag teams that are worthy of mention, any, because they kind of. I don't mean that in a bad way. I think WWE's kind of killed tag team wrestling, and it's my understanding, maybe I'm wrong, because I'm not speaking from a fact basis here, but it's my understanding that Vince McMahon hates tag team wrestling. That he just got sick of it, and he doesn't like it anymore, and he doesn't want it anymore, but he kind of lets it continue, but he's got no heart for it anymore. And so you don't see any great tag teams because they don't want to make any great tag teams. They've purposely kept a lid on the tag team wrestlers, and they do that same thing with the girl wrestlers. And you know, I love tag team wrestling. It's a whole different kind of psychology than what you get with two single wrestlers. It's a whole different kind of match, and I love tag team wrestling. And a lot of the girl wrestlers today, they're really good wrestlers, really good athletes, and really skilled. And Jim's daughter, Natalia, is as good an example of that as I can think of.
It wasn't easy. Thank you, thank you.
But we, you know, there's a lot of guys I wish when I think of guys I could work with, I would love to wrestle Punk. I'd love to wrestle 1997 bad guy, Bret Hart, Canadian-American basher guy. Would have been a great against John Cena today. I mean, I would love to have been a bad guy against John Cena. It would have been so much fun, you know. I don't know, Jim, anybody you wish you could have worked with?
Well, Bret, you haven't forgotten about those matches that we had against each other in the Hart Foundation tour, which is sold out everywhere in 1994 over the world.
And yeah, I do remember those. I do remember Jim slammed me in one match, and it was like my hips were on ball bearings. It was like, I thought my hips went right through the floor. Jim could slam you through the floor of a mat, and not too many guys could pancake you like Jim could.
Some of those matches are on YouTube. The Madison Square Garden one between you two, it's pretty crazy.
There's one match of me and Jim wrestling in Germany, circa 1981. We were both pretty young bucks, and Jim was wrestling every day. And I was off every night. It seemed like every night for like 3 months. We had this tour tournament over there. And I remember being kind of mopey and sad and all that, like kind of, I was bummed out because I wasn't working every night. I wanted to wrestle, and every night I was sitting in the dressing room like, I got paid the same whether I wrestled or not. So I made the same money Jim did. And Jim, in the meantime, was working every night and really working really hard. And finally, they threw me and Jim against each other. I don't even remember why. We had to wrestle each other. And I can remember I've been off for quite a while. And I just watched this match a few months ago when I was trying to get this Dungeon collection of DVD matches for WWE for that new DVD that came out. And I watched this match with me and Jim. It's so funny because I kicked Jim right in the gut as hard as I could with the toe of my boot. You can see Jim's face, like he just looks at me and it's like, easy. Take it easy. And I remember it's like, I've been off. You know, it was like, I've been off for a really long time, and I was really
did
nervous.
hurt, by the way. Still feel it.
But to watch it on it's an old black and white video that I watched, and it was just so funny to watch it because I waited for it because that's the only thing I remember from the match was that kick in the. And I do remember one other match I had with Jim in Anaheim, and Jim's mother came to the show, and. It was about a week before we teamed up. We actually started teaming up. It was right around that time that this whole thing happened with me and Jim. And I remember like, why are we fighting each other when we're starting to team up together next week? And it's like, I don't know, but you're against Night. So they put me and Jim out there, and I remember Jim power slammed me at the end and pinned me. And he was walking out of the ring. It was Jim's hometown, Anaheim. And so they were cheering him all the way through the match. I remember lying in the ring, and I remember I was just thinking, like, do I get up and crawl out of here, or does somebody come get me? And I thought, I'm going to let somebody come get me. I'm just going to lie here. And, you know, I laid there for about 5 minutes, and the fans threw garbage in the ring, and I remember there was like a paper cup or something right on my eye. And I just lay there, and I blinked and sort of made it roll off my face. And I remember just kind of getting up and walking all the way back to the dressing room. I was like, nobody cared. It was like, I came back, and it was like, I think it was my last match as a good guy at that time. I think I started the next week with Jim as a bad guy. But it was like a fitting way to end my career back then anyway. The good guy part of it.
Okay, it's hard to believe we're actually almost out of time. I've been trying to get back to the back person, so we'll have to do last question.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
I was wondering, back when you guys were big and wrestling was as huge as it was and everything, do you think I think it's going to take a second promotion with the competition for wrestling to ever regain that dominance that it had? Who do you think, if anybody, will be that second promotion out there?
I don't know. I don't think it's going to be, what is it?
Well, they better have some money.
Yeah, they better have some deep pockets. There's what is that?
TNA?
TNA, yeah. TNA's not going to cut it. They're going the wrong direction. The WWE's still number one. They're going to be number one for a long time. But there's somebody's going to come up with a different promotion, and that'll give the wrestlers a lot more flexibility as far as a bargaining position. You know, right now it's like, you know, like WWE, it's like you're just lucky to get there and get signed, and you got to do whatever they tell you to do, and you got to do everything. You have no say in your name, your career, the direction you're going, your outfits, everything is controlled by them, because you got no position, you got no leg to stand on. Like they own everything. If you don't do things their way, they'll just pass you up and take somebody else, and it's that kind of cold cut there where they run the show and they want it done their way, and they don't always know best, but that's how it works there, and you got to kind of comply. And someday, if someone does open up another wrestling company and someone starts promoting and gives competition to WWE, you'll see that'll all change again, where the wrestlers start having control over their characters. And well, unfortunately, the Stampede thing a few months ago was not tied in necessarily with the Hart family. It was tied in with a couple of the members of the family that didn't necessarily know what they were doing, but that was a far cry from the Stampede Wrestling that my father put on. And you know, one thing about Stampede Wrestling that my father put on is he paid the bills every week, and this organization that opened up calling themselves Stampede something, Tribute Wrestling or whatever, unfortunately was anything but a tribute to my dad and his wrestling.
Well, I actually think you guys are a great tribute to your dad and the Hart legacy here in Calgary, and we thank you so much for coming here today. And you guys are here tomorrow as well, right? You're signing and doing photos tomorrow. So if you guys didn't get a chance to ask your questions, please go chat with them. And thank you so much for coming.
Thanks
Thank you.
for coming and see us.
Thank you.
All right, if everybody could just please leave by the 2 doors at the back, that would be excellent. Thank you. If you do have a VIP pass and you are wanting to stay around for the Terminator, you may stay in your seats.